Hello everyone, a very warm welcome. My name is Louie Shalin and I welcome you all to my next episode of Whispers of the Soul. It's been a pretty while since we are having this episode after the previous one, but yes, I promise you this is gonna be one of the best episodes we are gonna be having as we are being joined by a very special guest of ours. She is a writer of one of the great books, Masters of the Elements. Her name is CC Sullivan. She'll be joining us in a while, and yeah, just waiting for her to join. It's gonna be a really nice conversation with her. Waiting for her to join, and we've been talking to her about this book and what turned out to be a really, really nice one and something which has been really exciting and interesting. Okay, great. So here we are. So hi, Sullivan. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you. It's great to have you here. A very warm welcome to
Thank you.
one of our.
Thank you. I'm not used to doing this, so I'm a little nervous, but oops.
Ah, well, that's perfectly fine. Yeah. Yeah, it will be just a normal conversation and yeah.
So
So
what did you want to know?
yeah, so can you please tell us a little about your book, Master
Um,
of Elements?
it's a story about six young university students. They range in age, and mainly it's about Lena, who's one that's the main character, and she finds herself on a journey through time as a
Hmm.
result of an episode that she has when she goes to the Galleria in Florence. It takes place in Florence. So she goes one day to the Galleria and she has an episode there which begins a whole chain of events to take her on this journey through time.
Hmm.
She and a group of her friends, she resists sharing what is happening to her because it's very strange to her. And then she eventually gets her five friends to help her along this journey in time travel.
Wow, that sounds really interesting. Time travel.
It's uh, it's it's time travel because it goes back to the Renaissance era.
Hmm.
Um, and she's in front of the statue of David, which is in the Galleria d'Accademia, and she sees something, and it starts a chain of events that leads her to finding out about the past and about the Renaissance, and then of course it leads her to her journey.
Wow, that sounds amazing. So it's kind of a journey that literally joins to different times through I would say, a string of time travel, and that opens up kind of a portal where six of the youngsters, they almost go to the past or they get connected to the past.
Correct.
Wow, that
Correct.
sounds really, really interesting.
It's it's an adventure, so it should be read that way. And
Hmm.
uh, these six students, they discover things about themselves that they didn't know, and so it's book one of a trilogy. So it's basically the introduction to these characters.
Right, so we can have a lot of more adventure coming up in the next two parts.
Correct. Correct. There is adventure in this one, but it
Hmm.
leads. This is the introduction. So, as some are book ones that tend to be the exploratory books, which explain what's going to happen. But it does get into the storyline halfway through into the travel part and getting to know the past more.
Right. Wow. So how did you come to this idea of time travel
Well,
and writing about it?
I went back to university. I had a graphic design diploma and I wanted to get a degree in it. So I went back to university to study fine arts. And in one of these courses, it was the history of the Renaissance, which I've always had an interest in. And
Mhm.
I'd always known about the great artists that lived during that time. I just never realized that they actually lived at the same time. Some of them, obviously,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
so I became so interested in that, and I wanted to incorporate all of that into a story, and um, that's how this came about. This whole story developed out of taking this history course that just I was just so interested in going back in time.
Hmm. That's lovely. That's lovely. Yeah, and it absolutely is like as we go about reading a book, we are going through a different realm and that exists beyond time and space. Because books they have a lifetime for they live for I would say more than 100 years or even more than that. So
Yeah,
that's also kind of a time travel.
and I wanted to. I don't. I mean, there's no real age group that would be reading my book, but if people know about these artists, I want them to be interested in the story, to see how my view of them
Mhm.
is. And if you don't really know about these artists, this would be kind of a good way for the younger generation to become interested in knowing about these artists. The story isn't centered around these artists, but it gives a bit of an overview and gives you a feeling of that time, to make you, I guess, hopefully to make you interested in finding out more about them. And then, as you know, at the same time, you're finding about these fictional characters who are starting, the beginning of this, I guess, mini saga of
Right.
three books.
Right. So it's a story which revolves around these characters, but it's not about them. And it's kind of a message, like kind of a message through them, what the way the story must have been woven together.
Well, I was fascinated with the fact that these artists in the Renaissance just had all of this genius in them, and and they all kind of existed at the same time, and so it got me thinking about why was that time period so strong in the arts and creation and scientific invention and everything, and so that kind of led to making to writing a story about people who also find out about their own
Mhm.
strengths and powers and go on. It is a fantasy, so it's these young kids find out about all of that.
Wow. So it's kind of those brains and those great brains which used to exist in the past, and reading about them, it's kind of fantasy that gets the youth from the time from now to that place, and it basically joins them. It's a bridge between that history. It's a fictional bridge that joins the history with the I would say with the youth or what's going on in the generation and how we are going about it.
Yes, and for me personally, when I go online and I'm on in Facebook or Instagram, but personally to me, I just see so much artistic creation going on, and I personally, me, I find it incredible. And so I also wanted to put a little bit of that into my story. My fictional characters are not all artists. They all come from they're all studying different things at the university, but they find a connection with each other through this journey that they go on.
Hmm. Wow, that sounds interesting. So, how has been, I would say, how has this the journey of writing this book? has changed you as a person, or how it has impacted you as a person?
Well, I think that when I first started writing this book, it was just I had the story to tell, and as I was telling the story, it took different paths. I had one idea, and then the idea changed, and then it built upon it, and I'm writing other books at the same time, but this one to me was what I would consider my first book and my first journey in writing. And as I mentioned when we spoke before, that it's this book is almost like my baby that I grew up. I went through the toddler years, and then I, went back, and I went through the teenage years, and now I feel like I've reached adulthood with this first book, and I'm ready to, let it go and let it start on this new journey with the other books. So
Wow.
I've learned a lot, and since I'm self-published, and I know that there's a lot of indie writers and a lot of self-published writers, there's a wide scope of the things you need to learn, because it's not just sitting down and writing. That's the whole fun part. I just for me, that's the whole fun part. After you have the letting go and wanting people to know more about your book and about the story, and I don't know, I'm just very excited. There's so many indie self-published writers, and we're all on this journey, and I'm really happy to be on this journey. Of course, it's wonderful to have one of the big five, get your book, but this is it's a different journey. It's you just happen to you learn a lot. A lot of it is in your hands. You're not giving it away to somebody else to do something with.
But you talked about it. I'm really, I would say, I can really connect, or rather relate with this analogy which you gave. Like, it's kind of raising a kid with writing of a book, because it's literally we nourish each and every seed of our idea about the book, and when it grows into, like, through a toddler, teenager, and that's like one of the lovely analogies, I would say, that you have given. It's really,
That's what it feels like, because it's, even with a child, they grow up, and you keep wanting to bring them back and say, oh, no, 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 wait, there's something else, and then finally, you have to let it go. You kind of say, okay, now, you can go off on your own, and people will either like you or don't like you. They'll react to you. But I don't need to bring you back and change you again and again. I think, it just seems, because it's like a baby, and like it's a part of you. You just want to keep holding on to it. And you have to learn to let it go. And that's been a process for me.
absolutely, absolutely. I was wondering if you can talk about a part from the book which you really connect to, or something which is your favorite part of the book, or if you can, like, read an extract as well, so that's also good.
Sure. I can read the first scene. I do
Mhm.
have to put the light up a little bit and put my glasses on. Um, it's the first scene in the book that I'm going to read.
Mhm.
And okay, so here we go. Florence, 1489. Tre, due, uno. Whoever is there, I will find you. Dante darted through the woodlands, while behind him, Damiano's faint cry resonated. Under the canopy, his feet tread upon the forgiving earth. He reached a fork in the path and hesitated, unsure which way to travel. To his left, a twig cracked, and beyond the slender trunks of saplings, something shifted. His attention set on the noise, Dante crouched low to the ground and to reach for a stick to defend himself. His fingers brushed against a cool, polished surface. This rock would have to do. He looked towards the underwood. A tree branch rustled. There! Two ice-gray eyes fixated on him. Beads of cool sweat trickled down his back. Stone in hand, Dante rose. Awaiting the beat's rush, he raised his arm, ready. The wild creature emerged on the pathway, transformed before his eyes into a young lady. Dante hesitated, astonished that those pale, unusual eyes belonged to her. She held his gaze, and Dante lowered his quivering arm. Her long dress fluttered in the light breeze, translucent. The curve of her body sent a shiver skittering through him. She lifted a finger to her lips to shush him, and though he wanted to, he dared not scream lest she stole away. Thereupon she whispered, just above a murmur. Dante cocked his head. He'd understood most of what she'd said, but one word had stood out, Firenze. With his senses coming back to him, he pointed the path to Florence. She carried a shiny silver box emitting an iridescent blue light. Except for the strange illumination, it reminded him of his mother's sewing kit, a small tin container. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and she slid the peculiar object into the fold of her finely embroidered dress. A high-pitched voice taunted from a distance, "Dante, where are you?" Her expression softened. Dante? So she stood one body's length away from him. Her warm breast caressed his cheek and tickled his ear, making the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. Was he imagining her closeness? "Si, signora. I am Dante di Ronaldo d'Alessandro," he answered in his native Florentine dialect. "How old are you, Dante?" He did not answer. A crease formed between her brow, and she repeated her question. "Quanti an?" "8," he said, and a hot flush rose to his face. The young lady's expression brightened as she moved to approach him. His heart hammered in his chest, and he turned, fleeing as fast as he could. As he ran, he glanced back to look behind him, but she had left. He stopped in his tracks, creeping back to where they'd met. The feathery touch of her breath lingered on his cheek, and he raised his hand to touch his skin, to capture and hold on to that memory. Had she been one of those magical forest spirits he'd heard his sisters talking about one day? Ahead, something sparkled. The gleaming object he'd held in her hand lay on the ground. With the tip of his sandal, he shoved the metal and glass case along the path, cautious to what it held. Curious, he approached and crouched down on his haunches to view it. Upon closer inspection, the case had a smooth, polished exterior. Picking it up, he jiggled it just once, and an image popped up onto its glass surface. He dropped the box as if it were alive. Steadying his balance, he plucked it up again. Despite his racing heart, he tapped the finger against its slippery glass cover. The image appeared again. The lady with eyes the color of silver. Like magic. He gawked at her likeness. How had she fallen inside this box? From beyond the trees, his brother hollered, "Dante! Come on, this game isn't fun anymore." Answering Damien's call, Dante shoved his new treasure deep into his pocket and dashed towards his brother's voice.
Wow. There's a what I could get. There's a mysterious undertone to the writing.
There's a mystery in the story, yes.
Shanyan said, "Great reading." Thank you, Shanyan.
Oh, thank you.
There's a mysterious undertone to it because it's something that is. It feels as if there is something which is wishing to be known, something which is calling the reader to itself, like, "Come on, see me, come on, see me." So it feels as if there's something which is calling for attention.
There's
Nice,
the present and the past meeting. So the silver box and Dante and being in the forest and being, people searching for him as well.
Right,
Well, I hope you
right.
enjoyed it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I did. In fact, also our viewers did. So, oh wow, that's nice. So, would you like to talk about the characters? Like, it is generally said what I have also experienced and what I've also talked to various authors and what I've also read across over the years that the characters which an author creates, one of the character is what we feel we are, what the author feels they truly are, what they can relate to. And one of the character is what they wish they would be.
Hmm. I think I do have a lot of characters in my book, and so I think there's a little bit of me in each of these characters.
Mhm.
The main character is Lena, of course, and the main character in the parallel story is
Mm.
Damien, and
Mm.
he hasn't been introduced. I didn't introduce him yet in this first reading, which is
Mhm.
actually the first scene in the book. He's not introduced there yet, but he happens to be the model for the statue of David, Michelangelo's statue of David, and so that's, of course, it's fictionalized. He's my rendition of who was the model for the statue of David.
Right,
And
right.
so those are the two main characters that carry the story through. And Lena, I would say she's a little bit of me. I would probably want to be like her. If you read the story and you read the book, you'll kind of see why. But she represents the journey of really finding out who you are and what your strengths and powers are as you go through life.
Mm.
And of course, my book is called Masters of the Elements. And it basically talks about, that's basic, without giving away the story, that is basically what the story is, becoming a master of your own elements. And
Mm.
so each of these characters goes through, and this is what they learn and find out about themselves. Damien, so let me just see. So Lena is a character. She's a girl who's gone through quite a bit in her life, and she
Mm.
feels kind of orphaned. And so this is her story of connecting to other people, especially her friends. So this is
Mm.
her growth of finding out where she belongs, where she fits, who are the people that she feels connected to. Damien, on the other hand, he has quite a bit of an easy life where he is, as much as you can have an easy life during the Renaissance. So it has its own set of challenges, and he doesn't want to change. He wants to keep his status quo. He likes where he is. He's happy, and through this modeling job that he gets, being the model for the statue of David, he also gets put into an adventure of his own, and he develops his own questions and finds out about who he actually really is.
Mm.
So
Wow,
it's that's
interesting.
and there's, of course, every other character kind of has that. It is a little
Mm.
bit complicated in that sense, so that's why the story starts off a little bit slower, so that people get to know who they are, and then it kind of launches off into the adventure. But that's
Mhm.
basically, and I think everybody has those sides. You deal with your past.
Right.
In the present, you're dealing with your childhood, with things that you need to learn about yourself in order to grow and move forward. And then there's the other part where you don't want things to change. You want things to kind of stay the same, and an event will happen that will force you to change rather than you wanting to change. And so
Absolutely.
that's
Mm.
basically the book in a nutshell.
Absolutely. I would say, quite also philosophical at the same time, that we are wanting to change, or there's a situation which is created that's asking us to change. So it's kind of something which we all go about and something which we all face.
And
And yes, of
sometimes,
course,
sometimes when we don't want to change, something happens that forces us to change.
absolutely, absolutely.
And
Right. Mm. That's quite interesting. So would you
it's
like to talk about,
sorry, no, go
yeah,
ahead.
sorry, sorry, please go ahead, yeah.
Oh, no, no,
You were
no,
saying,
no, go ahead. You go ahead. I can just ramble
yeah,
on.
right. So maybe if we can talk about a little more about, I would say, your journey or how the book has changed you as a person, like the change which you had in yourself when you were before writing the book and after writing the book. What has changed inside you?
From a writer's point of view, or
Yeah,
from a writer's point of view?
or from
Well,
a personal point of view as well, because
one of
while
the
writing the
yeah, sorry, yeah. There's parallel things. One of the ways that it has changed me is that I take a look at my own life and I see the growth that I've made as a writer and as a person, and the things that I find out about myself. And I'm kind of keeping that vague, and because if I'll end up telling the story, and I want people to read the story, but
oh, right,
it's
of course, you can
yeah.
keep
But
that.
in terms of the
Yeah,
elements, and it's obvious that the book is about the elements, and so um, it's a journey about finding out about even each part of you that is influenced by the different elements, as in fire, water, air, and earth. And we all have that within ourselves. Some of them are stronger than others. And finding the balance in that during the writing of this book has been sort of instrumental in helping me to think about all that. From a writer's standpoint, like I said before, there's so many steps to putting the story together. It'd be nice to just tell the story and be a storyteller, but there's, finding the ways that best brings across your ideas and your feelings and your thoughts about how to put together a story so that it's entertaining and it's adventurous, but you learn something as well from it. You want the reader to have that kind of growth as well. You hopefully want the reader to get to the end of the story and say, hey, what about me? Like, what about where my strengths are? What elements do I most connect
exhibit.
with? Is it fire? Is it passion? Is it water? Is it intuitiveness? Is it air? Is it imagination? Is it the earth? Is it the ground? Is it working with, the earth and being stable and grounded? So, you kind of, even if that's not the main gist of the whole story, you want, not you, but I wouldn't, I'd like my readers to get to the end and say, hey, I'd like to find that out about myself.
Hmm.
So that's to me is what I've learned, and I hope that gets imparted in the book, to lead people to learn more about themselves on that level.
Right. So the book, it's mainly kind of, I would say, not mainly, but yeah, it points towards that. It has a mysterious undertone of understanding oneself and who we are and what we are driven towards and what really defines us.
Yes, and because I'm very interested in astrology and tarot and the mystical arts and the occult and everything that's involved in that, that does tend to get into my stories. I think most of the stories that I have in my mind and on paper all integrate the mystical and the paranormal, and the occult. So if you are interested in that as well, you would probably enjoy reading this because it's all intertwined. It's all in the story. So
Right.
again, hopefully when readers get to the end, they might, if they haven't been interested in that before, it would be kind of cool if they thought, oh, it'd be kind of nice to find out what all my elements are and where my strengths are. And
Right, right, right. Occult, it's not, I would say, really different, or rather, it's not really any different from all occult is about is just the power of unknown. Anything that we cannot see or we cannot understand, that's occult. And there are just ways and means by which we are just trying to understand that because that's responsive in nature. We
right.
do something and we get a response and we calibrate it each time. And with that proper calibration, with those readings, we make a system and that's how it works. Be it tarot, be it astrology, or be it any other form of occult. So, well, needless to say, life isn't any different
Correct.
because
Yes.
it's as mysterious as it gets, and it's as I would say, there are a lot of things which doesn't seem logical, but they are true. But they are with having no logic. That's exactly where the logic lies. They are paradoxical, and that paradox is what we are living, and that paradox is life. So it's, I would say, more of a book on, it also leads to a self-discovery of the reader when the reader goes through and lives through the characters which are created in the book.
And I think too, if you look at the whole time travel idea, is we look to the past, whether it's distant or whether it's recent, with our own current lifetime past,
Mm.
and you look at another historical past, you learn more about yourself as well, because going into a distant past, you wonder how you would have and what you would have done in that time. Would you have thought the same thing as now? Would you have, astrology really started during the Renaissance. Leonardo was very much into astrology, and people were becoming very much in tune at that time. It wasn't really considered astrology by itself. It was actually still part of the science group because it was the study of the stars. At one point, it separated, and so people just automatically separated themselves from it, and you were either science or you were astrology or the occult. They just didn't seem to be joined anymore. Whereas at its inception, they were joined. And so what's interesting is and part of the story kind of just delves into that, is learning about your own makeup using the vehicle of astrology or the vehicle of tarot or any of the occult practices, is to, at the end of the day, is to learn about yourself. And
Absolutely.
so that's kind of where my story was. And at the same time, I made it an adventure. So it wouldn't be a nonfiction book, it would be a fiction book.
Well, of course, because fiction actually adds a lot of element of surprise to the book, and we can get to the context along with the content, because that may
Right.
become a lot of relativistic when if we are just talking about the content and if it's non-fictional. So yeah, of course, fiction, of course, it's a major part of life. All right, so we have a question from one of our viewers.
Okay.
Thank you, Shinyan. Thanks for the question. All right, she asks that you mentioned astrology when creating your characters. Do you have their astrological signs in mind?
Yes, I do. Definitely. And I would say they all have, a couple have the same, and a few of them have, there are 6 characters that are
Hmm.
the main ones that are going on this adventure. And yes, they do have their own astrology signs. And I tend to, I've always been interested in astrology. My father, used to draw up charts for all of his children. And so that got me interested. I knew from a very young age you know, that I was a Scorpio, was Leo rising. And even though, you know, at the age of 5, that didn't really mean anything to me, it meant everything to me growing up, because I've, you know, always tried to understand myself more using that. And that's very general. That's not even looking at your own charts. That's just saying, okay, I have, you know, the water element and I have the fire element. And, you know, so you kind of already start, even with that basic, you already know that you have that basic knowledge of yourself, and you can already use that to your advantage and to make it work for you.
Right, right. So it's also a self-reflection onto the characters through which you must have been relating to, like with your sign or the signs with the people who have been in your close groups.
Yeah, and even on a general level, if, you know, somebody starts to read, and I don't necessarily make it obvious that astrology is part of the story right from the beginning. But, you know, if people are interested in those subjects, you know, I tend to, even when I'm reading and I'm not reading my own book, I'll tend to look at character and I'll be like, oh, I wonder you know, what sun sign she is. You know, she sounds very much like an Aries, or she sounds very much like a Virgo. She's very careful, you know, obviously
Right.
in the general
Of-
sense, but, you know, you
Mhm.
kind of have fun with that. You kind of go, oh, you know, I wonder if she seems very much like me in these ways. I wonder if she's a Scorpio, or, you know, a Pisces, or whatever sun sign you happen to be. And to get away from astrology a little bit, it's the elements really that you need to really look at. You know, water is intuition, and fire is energy. And so how do you know, how would you use those two if those were your two strongest elements? And that basically, you know, that's, to me, that makes up the whole story. I could write a whole story just based on astrology if I wanted to.
Right, but it's also the response that we make based on the elements we have, and the different behaviors or different defense mechanisms which we portray based on them, or
And
different strengths that we have.
exactly, and how two people's elements can integrate and work together. You know,
Right.
a water person was a fire person, or a water person was an air person. And, you know, we're made up of all elements. We're not just made up of, you know, the sun sign and the moon sign and the ascendant. We're made up of all of the elements. It just, you know, when, for like natal chart, for example, will describe, will tell you basically, like a map will tell you what all your strengths are, where there might be some weaknesses. And it doesn't tell you what's going to happen to you, but it almost like gives you a map right at the get-go and says, this is what you're given. And, you know, so use what you know to move yourself forward.
Well, that's lovely. All right, so we have another question from our viewers from Shin Yansen.
Okay.
Uh, where do you find your inspiration on your bad days? As a creative myself, I know that we do not always wake up with the perfect content in the mind.
Well, you know, um, as for myself, I'm a graphic designer. That's what I went to school for. That's what I learned. That's what I did most of my career, was graphics. When you're in a job where you have to create on demand, it becomes a ritual. You sit there, and sometimes it's not easy. Sometimes you sit there in front of your computer or with a paintbrush or a pencil, and you just have to start, because sometimes you hit that, you know, you hit that wall. Either you don't know where to start, or there's just so much, and you know, you just have to get yourself organized. And, you know, you have sometimes, you know, I found as a designer, I would put all of my ideas into one. You know, I'd be like, oh, this is so cool, I'm going to put it in. Oh, this is great, I'm going to throw it in there as well. And then you'd have, you know, basically dog's barf, right? It would just, but if you don't start with that, It's always better to put more, and then you can take some away. But for me, waking up in the morning, I'm one of these people that I don't have really a difficult time to create if I want to create. But that's just because I've got into the ritual of designing and being creative on demand. I couldn't wait. When you're being paid at work to come up with an idea, you can't sit there and say, well, it's going to take me 6 months to come up with an idea for something that is needed that particular day. So you sit down and you just get started and you do, and creativity tends to feed creativity. If you just start and you get one word down and you get 2 words down and you get a paragraph, if that's all you get done that day, that's all you get done that day. I've had days where I had one sentence, where I was just so happy by the end of the day that the one sentence sounded the way I wanted it. And I might have left it and looked at it at another time and it just sounded like garbage. But on that particular day, that's what got me through that day.
Right, that's the victory on that day. That's what we can call a victory.
Yeah.
All right. So I would like to add a little, as I've been reading about the science myself, about astrology, and it's quite a pertinent question from a viewer, and I was personally want to add to that because uh, what my outlook has been for these many years that many a times what happens is our sign determines how we are going to respond to a particular situation or how we are going to be in our nature of expending our energy. Like I think you being a Scorpio, you're a water sign. So water
Right.
is something that starts with power, that starts with so when water has energy, it is generally potential energy. And when it starts at its maximum. So that makes you more of a morning person. And for example, me being a Leo, so Leo is like fire. Fire grows. It grows, it needs time. But when it grows well, it's established. It always has a very small and very, I would say, a very tiny start. It's just like one leaf, 2 leaves, 4 leaves, and then it grows up to a forest fire as well. And then air, it needs space. It needs space to grow its energy, and then it turns into a wind or maybe also a tornado.
Right.
And earth, they are as consistent people, they are very consistent. They provide space, they give space to everyone, they have space for everyone, they are welcoming, and they are the best hosts, I think. That's what makes one of their good parts as well. So I think based on these signs, for example, if a fire sign is starting wanting to do something, so what they are advised to do is to have a slow start. Is for them is to have a steady start, so they can be steady through the day. For air, they need to go to and fro, just travel, travel, think through. So it will give you a lot of
Mm-hmm.
energy. With water, just have a good start because that's all you have. And with earth, like just be consistent. So I think that can be, if it makes sense with you, like of
Oh,
course I'm
sure.
not an
Yeah.
expert like
Yeah. It's if I can add something to that too, is
yeah.
if you yourself know that you are, I think especially with creativity, but it can be for anything. But I'll relate it to creativity, whether it's writing, whether it's art. I should say whether it's painting or drawing. With writing, what's really good is to find somebody with whose energy you can become inspired, by which you can become inspired. So if, for example,
Oh,
the initial question was you were feeling, I don't know, I guess they call it writer's block. You were feeling a little blocked at the start. If you know that, so if I'm a water sign, and I know that I'm a little blocked in some ways, what okay, and my rising is Leo, which is fire, right? So I have to be careful too that I don't run off, into the distance and create that bonfire that's going to go out of control. So to me, I think I don't have much. I have a lot of air in some ways, but in the actual the grounding elements, I don't have very much. So for me, getting in touch with people that have a lot of air in them, as in Libras, Geminis, Aquarians, they tend to fuel, they're the air that make the bonfire bigger. So if I've got little kindles and embers that aren't really getting, I'll just reach out to someone. I don't necessarily do it consciously, but I'll know that I'll reach out to a friend that will feed that. That will say, here's a little bit of air to get you going. And, I think it's very important because writing is such and painting and drawing, all the arts are very lonely endeavors. A lot of times you're by yourself and you have to motivate yourself and you have to get yourself at your desk and you have to get typing and writing or drawing and painting. And I think it's very important to find somebody with whom you can share ideas with, that's going to spur you, that's going to say, what if you try this? Or why don't you try that if today is not working? And I think that's why these Instagram groups, or even just these feeds, the people that you add as followers, they kind of add to the inspiration, because you kind of, they share a part of themselves in the feed and you get inspired by that. And I think that's part and parcel too. I mean, I don't know who everybody's signs are and what elements they are on my feed, obviously. That would be kind of disturbing. It would be disturbing if I did, but if I did, if I know somebody and I get to know them well enough, and I do know, I would kind of say, oh, I find that person inspires me. I'm going to have a conversation with them. And I think we do that in our day-to-day lives, regardless of whether we know anything about astrology or not.
Right, absolutely. That one absolutely tends to do. That's guess the people, like this person, it has to be the sign because it's behaving like that. And yeah, these energies of other people, they are complimenting sometimes, sometimes they are not so complimenting, and this truly matters a lot in many of our endeavors, because when it comes to some of the particular activities, it's not really from our primary sign with which we are working. For example, an air person is doing a fire thing, it's adopting to a fire mindset, so that needs maybe an earth to give them space. But on the contrary, an earth will be anti to an air sign, but it's good for the fire sign. So, of course, yeah, it truly works like that. And I'm glad like you added it, because that's something which really matters. And also the choice of people in our life, the people with which the people we follow and the people we spend our quality times with, if they are really nourishing to our behavior, or they are cutting a part of ourselves, or they are canceling out something from ourselves, that really matters on how a person is going to lead their life. And also the emotional state, if they're going to be happy, confused, sad, excited, or I think that plays a major role on that.
I agree. I agree. Hang on one second, sorry. I got the sun shining in my eyes. It's blinding.
Right. All right. So any, I would say, a message you would want to give to the readers?
Other than read my book. um, uh, to readers, I just think what I try to do when I'm writing is I try to keep them in mind. And I think reading my book in particular is to think about those things yourself. If you're not really knowledgeable about astrology, it doesn't really matter. I mean, it's just. But if it leads you to finding more about yourself, I think that would be my message: is to, find out more about, the distant past, about what people did before. Also to find out about what makes you and where your strengths are. And I think that's pretty much where I'm going with my story, is to find out what your strengths are and to use them and to be able to move forward with your own strengths. And hopefully in some of these characters, you can see yourself and you can, it can lead you to learning more about yourself. So that would be, I think that would be my message.
Wow, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. It's a fiction though, but it relates to the reality at a much, much deeper level. And that's, I would say, that's quite appreciable on your part as an author because to relate it, rather to write something about the people and using fiction as a medium, like it's a message through a fiction, through different people. And it connects back the readers to themselves through the theory, which I would say, which is through the theory of not just astrology, but the theory of elements, that how elements are related and how they are related to us, and how the to and fro goes by, and how we can deal with them better.
Correct.
That's
And
lovely.
these,
That's
and to remember too that it's a fantasy novel and it's an adventure and mysteries thrown in there and
mhm,
hopefully it makes people feel like they've gone to Florence. If they've never. I mean, I went when I was younger, and that's one of my inspirations was being in that city. And
mhm,
if you've never been, it's definitely a city that is imbued and filled with history. So if you ever get a chance to, once we get past all this COVID
mhm,
19 stuff, if you ever have a chance to go to Florence, it's a city to visit. And on the surface, of course, it's a touristic city, so there's always going to be tourists. But to go deeper and find out about its history and the artists that actually lived there and the art that is there, and make sure to go and see the galleries
mhm.
and just walk around the city. It's just beautiful.
Right. That's true that France is not just known for its beauty, but also the mystique it holds in the streets, and also what exists or rather existed below the streets. So I think that's the true mystery, or that's the true essence of what France is, or which it has been. So I would say that's quite apt a city for what you rather chose your story to be based at, because it connects to the past, it lives in the present, it's an epitome of the future and how everything goes about it.
Well, the statue of David is prominent in my story, and when I was there and I stood underneath the statue, I was just, I mean, if you can't tell from my story that I was just fell in love with the statue, then I've missed my mark on my story. But my son's named David. So it was just that it just starts from it really the Kindle starts from there. It just started there, and then I moved on with my taking a history of Renaissance course, and it just kind of grew from there, and then it just this whole story just kind of came about from all that, and
Right,
yeah,
right.
I'd love to be one of those students again and go back there and go on this adventure that they go on. It would be kind of cool.
Right, absolutely. Absolutely. So I missed out on one point. Like, would you like to talk a little about what you mentioned initially for history and history, which is distant history or immediate history, like which is a few months, a few years back, or something that existed ages back?
In my book, you mean, in particular?
Yeah, in your
Well,
book and also
the
like your view on that.
the well, the book is technically the time travel, and it's present day Florence, and it's a time travel back to Renaissance. So that's the present going back to the distant past, which is 500 years ago.
Mm,
And as far as my own personal past as a writer, past, sorry, as a writer is I'm originally from France. I'm French, and so history and the past and everything that has to do with it is just, I can't say it's a part of me, but it's just I read so much about it that I just, I wish I could kind of hop there and see, how it was. Of course, there's some time periods where you just wouldn't want to be there, as in the plagues and all that. Like you just want to skip those parts, just like you want to, we want to skip the 2021. But there's so much. Like even in the Renaissance was the beginning of scientific discovery. It was the beginning of artistic discovery. It was when art began to change. It was, Leonardo was just a fascinating character. He's just fascinating to read alone, just about him. And Michelangelo, they're just amazing people. And that's where it all started. I learned about them and I read about them, and I made up like the characters. They are in the book, and I do fictionalize them because I have no idea what they were really like, since I've never personally met them. And a lot of the stuff that you read even online, you can kind of get your own idea, and that's what they are in my book. They're my own idea of who these artists were. And so and being from France, I'm from Burgundy, and it's one of the in a town that has medieval castles around. And that's when I first started writing my book, was when I went back there to live for a couple of years. And I would drive to work and I would drive home, and on my way from and to and from work, I would go past these medieval castles, and even though they've been turned into tourist spots right now, if you stay away from them, you can almost you can fantasize, you can almost picture the history that went on. And to me, that's where for this trilogy, that's where it all started. It's just imagining what it was like to live in that time. And being able to, being in the present, being able to go back there and see it and come back, that would be the ultimate. I don't know if I would want to stay stuck there, but if you're able to go and come back, it would just be awesome. It would just be, it'd be something I would do if the opportunity presented itself. I definitely would, and that's what writing is all about. That's the fantasy. You write about what you fantasize about. If you can write about anything. If you fantasize, you want to go back to the past, you write a time travel novel, and that's what you've done during however amount of time you write. That's where you are. I literally felt I was in Florence during the entire time I wrote this book. That's where I was. That's where I spent most of my time in my head.
Wow. Yeah, of course. Time is a relative phenomenon, and it's all in the head. It's all about what we think about it, and it's quite relative in nature. Wow,
I'm always thought, I'm not I shouldn't say I'm not, never say never. I've never really done any world building of places that don't exist, and you're making them up from scratch. But in my book, I know that I have smudged some things, because it's very easy nowadays to use Google and say, well, how long will it take to get from this point to that point? And on Google or on the maps, it'll say it takes 2 hours. In your book, it takes like 10 minutes, right? You just go like, we're just gonna bring that over here because I need that place to be closer to where I am. So if people read the book and expect to go map and go, wait a second, that's what fantasy is. You can kind of pull in and details that you want to work for your story. I tried to keep as close to the sense of time, even being back there. I did try to keep, if it took 10 minutes, it took 10 minutes. If it took 2 hours to get from one point to the other, it took 2 hours to get from the point.
Wow, that's some really good research.
And with
Really good.
Yeah, with Google Earth nowadays, you can actually go up the street and you can even see what buildings are there. I mean, I don't have to buy a ticket and go to Florence to
Absolutely.
be able to build my
Right.
world.
Right. Well, all right. Thank you so much, Stacey, for joining us today. We wish you all the best
Well,
for
thank
your
you.
book.
Thank
And
you
yeah,
for
thank
having me
you.